So in today's video, I will talk about the best property strategies and rank them for you guys based on my own experience of investing for over 10 years. Alongside this, I'm also going to be sharing some pros and cons of each of these 12 strategies too. And FYI, today, my experience includes buy-to-lets, HMOs, house conversions, commercial conversions, flips, buy, refurbish, rent refinance projects, title splits, planning uplifts, assisted sales, service apartments, deal sourcing, and I was very close to acquiring a few lease options too. Now, one thing to note is that the market is all over the place, my friends. So definitely check out the update videos. And one thing to remember, friends, is that choosing the right property strategy solely depends on your risk appetite. So don't blindly follow my lead and do what I say, because what you choose should depend on your resources such as money, time, skills, and of course what your actual goals are. So with that said and done, let's draw the following 12 property strategies into this tier list that I've knocked up. Now, number one is going to be HMOs, and the pros are pretty obvious. You can potentially earn more cash flow from a HMO property than you could from your normal standard rental property. A good HMO could also replace your income or most of it if you get it right, which of course you would need it in the right area and with the right tenants. But the cons for me is why I won't rank this as high as you probably initially thought, because you're simply managing more people, and with more people potentially comes more problems. Because although you could outsource some of this, such as the tenant management, for example, I'm going to assume that we are going to be doing a little bit of work here. And there is far more you need to adhere to, not just in terms of people management, but also in regards to legislation, which in return equals more costs and more things you just need to stay up to date with. Additionally, the resale options may not be as great as buy-to-lets, because at least with a normal house, it's pretty easy to sell to a much larger demographic. Now, I do have more in-depth videos on the pros and cons of HMOs, but I'm just going to have to rank this as a C for this video. Next up, let's look at deal sourcing. Now, although I have a video here, my friends, on how you can get started as a deal sourcer, an obvious pro is that I would say this is a great way to get exposure to property if you don't have much capital, or you don't want to become a landlord and take projects on yourself. Essentially, in a nutshell, you can find them, package them up and sell them on and make cash for doing so. Plus, the more you do, the more you'll learn about property types, investment figures like ROI, for example, and how to negotiate with vendors and agents, and also how to sell a deal to an audience. But the cons still exist as well, my friends. Firstly, it takes a certain level of skill to find a good deal that's actually worthy of selling. You also then need an audience to sell it to. Plus, you need time to view and analyze properties, and friends, you've got to get used to a lot of rejections before you finally get those deals over the line. Plus, I'd also say actually, you won't be making that money instantly. There's normally like a 6-month, 9-month delay, depending on, of course, once that property transaction goes through. However, I would say that because it's not capital intensive and requires simply more grit and hard work, it can definitely yield you great results. Mind the pun. So for that reason, I'm going to rank this as a B. Number 3, assisted sales. Now, this is one of my favorite strategies because you can get deals done swiftly and with less capital. So cheaper and quicker transactions, definitely an advantage. I see assisted sales as like supercharged flips when of course you get them right. And in case you haven't seen this video over here, which explains it in a lot more depth on how you can get started with it, I'm going to run through a quick example with you guys where the vendor is struggling to achieve the higher value of the property that they want. This is where you could introduce yourself, because you know that you could sell it for maybe even more, because you're super smart and you watch all the videos on this channel, because you're subscribed, that you can sniff out that there's huge potential in this opportunity that isn't being taken advantage of. So using basic numbers, let's say they have a property listed for £100,000 that isn't selling, but you know that it could definitely reach £150,000 if, let's say, they just spent £10,000 on the renovation. You could offer to pay that £10,000 towards that property renovation to achieve the £150,000 asking price that they're after, and then offer to maybe split that £40,000 uplift in value to obviously get it sold. And just before your mind starts ticking over and thinking, wait a minute, I have some questions, I'm going to answer them for you right now because I know exactly what you're thinking. The first one is probably, why don't they spend $10,000 to get that uplift and share it with themselves? Well, many don't know how to spend the right amount of money on property deals. So that's where you can obviously come in. Others may have, let's say, inherited that property, so just want to sell this on. And this is where you can come in and you can tell them the property's potential based on you assisting them via this sale. Or finally, they may just not have that money to renovate and spend that £10,000. So back to the example, by you coming in and offering £10,000 towards that renovation and now splitting that uplift in value of, let's say, 40,000, should they sell it for 150, that would essentially mean that you would not only bypass buying it yourself, which saves you months and months in terms of the sale going through, but you could also save yourself in conveyancing fees, broker fees, and of course, one for stamp duty. So get it right and you could be in and out within a few months. However, there are some downsides, my friends, and one of them that I found in my experience is they're hard to come by. Certain areas may have more of these than others, and you may still need more cash than if you're doing, let's say, deal sourcing, for example. But if you can get even 1 or 2 of these a year, you could potentially replace your current income. So for that reason, I'm gonna have to put this as a B. Number 4 is flips. Now, this is a popular strategy made famous by Homes Under the Hammer for the majority of the nation. Now, the pros, as you know, you can make lumpy cash, and there's always, almost always, properties available across the UK where you can do a flip, because essentially there's always going to be properties that need work out there, and there's always going to be areas where demand is always high. Plus, this could also be a great strategy if managing tenants is not on your bucket list. However, they do require a lot of capital, either from yourself, from investors, or from bridging loans. And also another con that I would say is just the timescale element. If a person is buying it, let's say with a mortgage after you, you're looking at least 6 to 9 months to flip things and get out. And some people may claim that they flipped it a lot quicker, and I'm not saying that's not the case, but you got to be mindful of the person buying that property. Sometimes their lender may need you to have owned that property for at least 6 months. So that's why I always say 6 to 9 months is normally what you should at least, at very minimum, be giving yourself in terms of a timescale. And FYI, conscious of people from outside of the UK watching this channel, when I say flipping properties, I'm of course talking about flipping properties in the sense of buying a property, refurbing it or adding value, and then selling it on the open market, not selling contracts for the ownership. So anyway, I'm going to put this as a C. Number 5, new builds. Now, as many of you know, I'm building some new builds currently as of recording this video. And the pros of these are there's different levels of satisfaction. There's just a nice feeling when you're building something from the ground up, taking care of it along the way to either sell or rent on. Now, if you buy the land at the right place, and do the work to a decent cost where the GDV allows for enough profit, it can definitely be rewarding from a monetary perspective. However, there are as always cons as well. They can just take absolutely ages. And from a cash flow perspective, that could be a problem in terms of days, months, or even years when you actually get your final payday. Plus, it's capital intensive. Now, if you're comfortable with your money, with your monthly income, having a few of these on the side could potentially work. And personally, for me, in the last few years, it's done okay. So therefore, for that reason, I'm going to probably rank this as a B. Number 6, commercial conversions. Now, this is my favorite one to date, and one that I can probably see myself doing a lot more in the future. So you probably know where I'm going to rank it. Now, granted, I'm no expert on this as I've only converted a few buildings into flats, but generally I find the price per square foot is cheaper for commercial buildings, and there's less competition when going for these types of properties. There's also pros like capital allowances, which we got on our site, which in some circumstances can be an absolute game changer. Now, there are also cons too, and I'm sure if I did more of these, as I will be hopefully in the future, I would have a lot more to share with you, my friends. But right now, my slightly biased opinion, providing you can get the right people around planning, building regulations, and knowing what you can and can't do with it, it's a no-brainer of a strategy for me. So I'm going to rank this as an A. Number 7, lease options. A great way to take control of a property, either to utilize it for cash flow or until you can find the money to acquire it at a later stage. Lease options are great for investors as it allows you to earn from a property in the short term without forking out huge capital amounts. But I do want to be fully transparent here, my friends. My experience is short-lived with these. Despite knowing how they work and almost having many over the line, I don't want to pretend to you guys that I'm an expert or someone who's done many of these. I always say that these can work, and if you get direct to vendor, they can definitely work even better. I also see a huge potential personally for these working in the next year or so, especially if the market does wobble and people start to fall in negative equity. But it's not something that you can just do willy-nilly, and it does take a little bit of skill, my friends. But get it to work though, you could be laughing, at least for the duration of the lease, and it could be a great stepping stone to getting your foot on that ladder. So for the reasons mentioned above, if done right, and hopefully next year, I can show you some examples of us utilizing this ourselves, I'm probably going to rank this as a B. Number 8, rent to rent. Now, we do rent to rent with our service apartments that many of you have seen and some of you have actually invested in. It takes some cash to start and takes a huge amount of energy. In fact, I'd probably say it's actually like a full-time business, hence the reasons it requires a huge amount of man hours and work. However, if you get it right, it can be lucrative and you could do very, very well from it. And thankfully, it's doing well for us right now. But we are 3 years into this on a full-time basis. So right now, we're also in a position where we're scaling up, we're taking on investors, some of you who are subscribed to this YouTube channel, because we've managed to survive the pandemic and we've managed to survive over thousands of problems that have occurred during us running this business. And we've overcame those. So this is probably one of the fields that I do feel that we are somewhat close to being experts in. So where do I stand with this? Where would I rank this? Truthfully, I'd probably put this as like a B plus. It was almost an A because if you do it right, it can be great, but I have to stress there are some drawbacks. You're at the mercy of a landlord first and foremost. So the overall control is dictated by somebody else. So your business and your cash flow can disappear from you under your nose before you know it. There's a lot of trial and error going on in the first instances too. Some areas are getting more saturated with a lot of big operators coming in. And this is why sometimes when you see people selling rent-to-rent deals for thousands and not taking them on themselves, just get a little bit cynical, because we noticed straight away that a lot of people were doing this, and mainly because either their figures were fudged or they didn't know how to run a rent-to-rent business. So this is essentially why we offer JV opportunities to show our skin in the game with the deal itself. And whenever we do source any of these on, we take on the management. So the investor at least knows that we need it to work as much as them. So be careful of people sharing these figures with you. Normally, if they're too good to be true, they usually are. And always question in the back of your mind, why aren't you guys taking this on yourselves? Number 9, serviced accommodation. Now I'm talking about owning the building. So if you own the building and you run it as a serviced accommodation, you can make a lot of cash. It has all the benefits of owning an asset too, such as wealth creation in the long term, but it also has all the benefits of rent to rent too. In fact, you're going to be making a lot more money, because if you own the asset, the chances are your mortgage is going to be less than the rent you would have to guarantee the landlord. So guys, it's an A from me. Number 10, planning uplifts. Now, many of you know on this video over here, I made a decent amount of money from this property strategy. But the last thing I want you guys to do is go all in on this and jump in and risk losing thousands and thousands, my friends. It's a much higher risk of a strategy. And I only did it myself because I was comfortable with the team around me. Plus, we also had some links with the planners in place on the project. So rather than pretend it's easy and showcase you guys that anyone can do this and then, you know, try and sell you something off the back of that, I want to be transparent with you guys. So I am actually going to put this as a D. Now, people may argue and say it should be an A or a B, but realistically, it's time intensive and it can cost thousands too. And there's always some level of not having 100% guarantee that you'll get what you want. And for us, we have to spend around £100,000 to get that profit number mentioned in that video. Number 11, buy, refurbish, refinance projects. Now, on the whole, these are my favorite types of projects. These are what I would call my bread and butter when it comes to doing what I know the most about. I've got multiple videos on this, my friends, and these are often the type of videos where you probably see me talking about a free house. Context obviously required. Now, the only downside I'd say to these is if you need to sell it or want to sell it. There's a CGT bill at the end that could hurt, but this will go straight in at A. Now, of course, you're going to need some skill set around it in terms of how much you should spend, but a general rule of thumb, if you're not going to watch the other videos on this channel, my friends, is try and add at least £3 of value for every £1 that you spend. Number 12, buy to lets. Now, if you had asked me years ago, I would have said buy to lets would be one of the best property strategies. But now, especially with the way the market is, the way the rates are, tenant protection outweighing landlord protection, the sabotage that seems to be going on from, let's say, the government and bigger people out there to get rid of smaller private landlords, I'm not a huge fan. And just to clarify, when I say buy to lets, I mean the standard putting down 25% deposit and then renting it out. If you do it via the BRRR strategy, it's a different ballgame. However, for the purpose of this video, I'm going to have to put this as a D, my friends. Now, feel free to drop your rankings below. Tell me where I'm completely wrong based on your experience. And as always, friends, have an awesome day.